In this video, we're going to sketch out our Game Boy with splines, which are basically Cinema 4D's version of paths that you'll typically find in your Adobe apps that you're familiar with, like Illustrator and After Effects. So the first thing I want to cover is just how you can launch Cinema 4D Lite, and you have to do it from inside of After Effects. And it's very simple. You just go to File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D File, and for now I'm just going to save this as untitled. And with that, we are launched into Cinema 4D Lite, again, from inside of After Effects. And the first thing we're going to do is go over all of the spline tools. Now here is the spline button right here. I'm going to click and hold, and that will reveal all of the spline tools we have. So this is going to be very, very reminiscent to path tools inside of Illustrator or After Effects. We have the freehand tool, which I can just freely draw inside of my viewport. And since I'm in the perspective view, this is something that we're going to have to keep in mind here since we're dealing with 3D space, is that if I click this little button right here, that's going to bring up our 4-up camera view. Again, like in After Effects where you can also do 4-up, so we got top view, right view, and front view. And you'll notice from our right view that this isn't exactly a flat spline. You can definitely tell that from our top view. And then if I orbit around my spline here, you can definitely see that this is not flat. So if you want to create flat splines, typically what I'll do is go into my front view, and again, instead of freehand this time, maybe I'll choose Bezier. And again, Bezier is clicking and dragging, and again, just works exactly like you would expect it to. So if you're from Illustrator or After Effects, you are right at home with the Bezier tool. And to actually close this spline, to close this Bezier spline, we're just going to go into the object properties of our spline and just click Close Spline. And then I'll close that right up. So I drew this in my front view. I'm going to click this button again to go into our 4-up view. And you can see that we built a flat spline. That is flat as a board, and that is because we drew it in our front view. So you won't have any of those kind of issues with depth unless you want to actually click on these spline points and manipulate them in 3D space. But if you're looking for flat spline creation, just do it in the front view and you'll be good to go. So that was our Bezier spline. And so I can actually go into individual points here. And if we want to convert this Bezier handle to more of a linear spline, we can just right click on that point and click hard interpolation. You can see that by the icons here, we don't have Bezier handles, and then the soft interpolation, we have Bezier handles. So I can go hard interpolation, and then I'll make a hard interpolated spline point with no Bezier handles. I can do the same thing here, or I can select them all by going to rectangle selection. I'm just going to click and drag, and I got all my points selected. I'll right click, go to hard interpolation, and now we have linear splines. And I can also right click on these and go soft and introduce some Bezier points right back into it. So we can also build linear splines by going to the linear spline tool and just clicking and dragging. Again, close the spline by checking close spline, and there we go. So very, very easy. Again, very reminiscent of your path creation tools inside of Illustrator or After Effects. This is just very easy stuff. So on top of all the spline creation tools here, we also have spline objects, which are going to be very, very handy in building specific elements. So let's just go ahead and start building our Game Boy. And to start, I'm going to create a rectangle spline, and right now we have it facing the wrong direction. We actually want this in a different plane. So we can go in here and choose our different plane mode here, and I want it to be X and Y, and that'll make it face forward. So perfect. And then we can adjust the width and the height here by adjusting these object properties in here. We can also introduce some rounding by checking the rounding checkbox there, and we can adjust the rounding or the chamfering if you're familiar with that term inside of Illustrator. So let's just do like a slight rounding, maybe 15, And let's just start building our Game Boy elements. So there's the main body, right? So I'm going to command click and drag to duplicate that rectangle. And I'm going to build the little screen portion. And if I actually want to edit this further, see right now I can't edit this at all, but if I hit C, that'll actually release this to individual points. So it's almost like in After Effects where if you have a shape layer and you have a rectangle path and you want to release it or convert it to a Bezier path, basically the same kind of thing. We're making this editable so we can have access and edit those path points or those spline points. So I can actually go in here and kind of move individual points around. I'm going to go into my front view here and just kind of adjust these points like so. So maybe I want this one edge to be a little bit rounder than the rest. Perfect. And I'll just name this screen backing. And this will be main body. And now we can go and I'll just, again, command click and drag this main body to create the actual screen. And I'll just adjust the width and the height here. And make sure I'm clicking and dragging these axis points so I'm not moving them forward or anything like that in Z space. So they're all on the same plane. And we'll get rid of the rounding there, so I'll just turn that off. And that's looking good. So now we can actually create some buttons. So we'll go back into our spline menu here and we'll just use some circle splines. And again, we have all these options in the object properties field. We can use an ellipse by kind of shrinking it in the X or the Y. I can also create a ring, and that'll give us an inner radius here, which is pretty useful. But we're just going to use the radius here and just bring this down to say 30 and then just position this in space. And I'm clicking this little area here to constrain it to the X and the Y plane. So I'm not moving it again forward or backwards inside of Z space. We can also go into our front view, and this is probably way easier, and just move this around and position this. And I'm going to command click and drag and duplicate this button and put that in place like so. And then we can create our little gamepad. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a couple rectangles. So I'm just going to decrease the width and the height. Just put this in position, and then I'm going to command click and drag, and then just hit R and rotate it. And I'm going to hit shift to kind of constrain that to increments of 10 and just rotate that 90 degrees. Could have also just gone in here and just entered in 90 degrees in our rotation B. And now we want to actually join these two rectangles together to create one actual spline. So there's something similar to the Pathfinder in Cinema 4D Lite, and it's actually called the Spline Mask. I'm going to go into our little generation tools here and go into Spline Mask, and what we can do with this is whatever splines we add as a child underneath our spline mask, we can actually, if I go into my object properties here, we can actually add those two together. So right now, that by default, the mode is A union B. So it's going to add those two objects together and create one spline. So it just simply added the rectangles, created our little cross or our little gamepad element, which is really super useful. And again, we can go in here and add just a little bit of rounding if we want to, just some subtle rounding. And that is perfect. So this is the basic outline of our little Game Boy asset. So what we can also do is use Illustrator files and we create an Illustrator and actually bring them into Cinema 4D. And we'll demonstrate that right now. So here I am in Illustrator, and I built out a more complete version of the Game Boy. You can see a lot of the elements that we already built inside of Cinema 4D Lite using their spline tools. But if we get art sent to us as an Illustrator file, we can easily import the splines or the paths from Illustrator and import them into Cinema. But there's one important step we need to do to be able to import these paths into Cinema. So what we're going to do is we're going to save as, and this is the very important step. I'll just rewrite over the AI file I already have. And this is the most important step, is when you're prompt for a version, we're going to go all the way down to Illustrator 8. Now that's just what you have to do. That's the most compatible version of paths that Cinema 4D can actually read. So we're going to save to a legacy format, hit OK, and then we can actually jump back into Cinema 4D Lite. We can create a whole new composition, and we're going to import those paths, those Illustrator paths, into Cinema. So I'm just going to go to Open and just open that AI file, and I'll just say OK. And what's going to happen is that's actually going to bring in all of our paths as one. And that's actually not what we want. So we're going to actually do this again. And we'll just say yes. And this time we're going to say don't connect those splines. So this is something that you could run into if you want to actually bring in splines and actually have the opportunity or the ability to manipulate individual splines. We can do that by disconnecting the splines, and grouping splines is okay. Hit OK. And now we have all of our individual paths inside of Cinema 4D from Illustrator, which is really, really handy. So what I'm going to do is just zero out the coordinates here to center this in our scene. We have our Illustrator paths inside of Cinema 4D Lite that we can now start manipulating as we please. So you can see how intuitive and easy it is to create and manipulate splines inside of Cinema 4D Lite. So if you're familiar with paths in other Adobe apps, again like Illustrator or After Effects, you're going to feel right at home with all the intuitive spline tools inside of Cinema 4D Lite.